Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has graciously agreed to join me for a 6-part interview leading up to Election Day. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us. You are currently borrowing $424 million a day, $17 million per hour. How do you think this economic policy will affect the economy in the days to come?
I don't know. When I think about the biggest, most important economic policy this government, if re-elected, would move forward, you'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy.
When is your plan to balance a budget, and how do you think you will accomplish this?
And the budget will balance itself.
What qualifies you to be the Prime Minister and be in charge of Canadians' tax dollars?
An inability to handle small numbers and little calculations, those easy things that people do so well.
Mr. Prime Minister, what is the most important thing that you have learned since being elected Prime Minister back in 2015?
The sky is blue and the grass is green.
What kind of a tax hike could the middle class expect in order to pay off all the debt your government has accumulated?
The number we talk about is 70% increase.
There's a lot of questions about whether the price that you put on carbon is actually a tax grab aimed at crippling people in the prairie provinces. Could you clear that up for us, Mr. Prime Minister?
This pricing on carbon.
In the past, we have had challenges with tariffs on the steel we export to the United States. I was wondering if you could explain to Canadians how that relationship works.
We import more steel than the Americans import. We have a significant trade surplus. The Americans have a significant trade surplus with us on steel, which means we buy steel from them, they buy steel from us.
Well, I guess that sort of clears things up, Mr. Prime Minister, I guess. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series tomorrow. Welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Mr. Prime Minister, what is your most important job as the leader of the country?
Photo ops.
Let me rephrase that. What are you focused on in regards to keeping this country safe? As a leader, how do you think is the best way to respond when somebody points out a mistake that you have made?
No, we will not apologize.
If Canada was ever faced with an invasion from another country, what would your first response be?
Out our CF-18s and show them how big they are.
We just recently hit the 1,000-day mark of when the 2 Michaels were arrested by China. If you are re-elected, what is your plan to secure their release?
Lob tomatoes across the Pacific.
In your dealings with other world leaders, what comment has been made that has bothered you the most?
Those socks don't match.
What country has done the best job of gaining your respect?
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China.
Well, what one thing do you wish Canada would adopt from China then?
Their basic dictatorship.
There's a lot of turmoil in Afghanistan right now. What is your hope for the region, Mr. Prime Minister?
We need to see the Taliban step up.
Well, then what do you have to say to the soldiers who have lost comrades fighting the Taliban and are being taken to court over their medical bills?
They're asking for more than we are able to give right now.
Stay tuned for part 3 tomorrow. Welcome back to part 3 of my interview with Justin Trudeau. Mr. Prime Minister, what is something that you have been involved with since 2015 that you would like to let Canadians know about?
Involved in creating a cover-up to hide the truth from Canadians. The fact that Canadians are finding out that we cannot believe our Prime Minister and his office, we cannot trust them to tell the truth, is a massive, massive issue.
You have been now through several campaigns, both as an MP and as the Prime Minister. What have you found works the best when you are out campaigning?
Nastiness and division
work.
It is no secret that you called this election because you believe that you can get a majority government. So what are some things that you have tried to do to ensure that you can secure that majority government?
Exaggerating the anxieties and looking for clever wedges.
There's a lot of differing points of view on a lot of things these days, Mr. Prime Minister. So what is your attitude to those who disagree with you?
One who disagrees with this government gets pushed aside.
So you don't believe it is necessary to respect those who have a different point of view than you?
This is not a government who values their voices. Not a government who accepts easily the legitimacy that exists in every member sitting in this House who is duly elected.
So then what do you have to say to Canadians who are frustrated with how your party has dealt with those people who have disagreed with you?
Bringing down of the level of debate to where it is right now, Canadians should be outraged.
Could you finish this sentence the best way that describes you? When I am campaigning, I am
Eager to use the politics of division, always eager to highlight differences between Canadians rather than pulling them together.
Be sure to stay tuned tomorrow for part 4. Welcome back to part 4 of my interview with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Mr. Trudeau, just to kick off this part of the interview, I was wondering if you could list all of the Canadian provinces and territories.
British Columbia, Yukon, the Northwest Territories, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Nunavut, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, or Newfoundland and Labrador.
Well, I hate to point out, Mr. Prime Minister, but you did miss Alberta. And on that note, it has been said that you ignore people from certain provinces and don't give them the same treatment as those from other provinces. Is this true, and who do you target with that type of behavior?
Albertans and Saskatchewanians.
4 years ago, Canada celebrated a very important milestone. I was wondering, Mr. Prime Minister, if you could remind Canadians of that milestone.
We celebrated the 100th anniversary of Canadian Confederation.
Well, actually, Mr. Prime Minister, it was 150 years since Confederation. But anyhow, moving on. How do you view Quebecers in relation to the rest of Canadians?
Quebecers are better than the rest of Canada because, we're Quebecers.
Really appreciate your honesty on that answer, Mr. Prime Minister. What is something that you hope Canada can accomplish in the near future?
And there is something very special about imagining a woman prime minister. I think it's long overdue.
Mr. Prime Minister, you might want to Google Kim Campbell and become a little more educated on Canadian history. There's a lot of people who say there's a liberal bias in the media. How do you respond to that?
You sometimes hear about liberal bias in the media these days, how they're constantly letting our government off the hook for no good reason. Frankly, I think that's insulting. It's clear that they let us off the hook for a very good reason, because we paid them $600 million.
Well, that was a very revealing answer. Be sure to tune in for part 5 tomorrow. Welcome back to part 5 of my interview with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Mr. Prime Minister, the environment has always been an important issue for you. Can you explain how your family has changed their lifestyle in order to be more environmentally conscious?
We have recently switched to drinking water bottles out of when we have water bottles out of plastic. Away from plastic towards paper, like drink box water bottles, sort of thing.
What should people avoid doing if they still have serious concerns about catching COVID?
Breathing or speaking moistly.
This election, there's quite a few federal parties running. What sets the Liberal Party apart from the rest?
We like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
Is there something else that is a close second that sets your party apart from the rest?
the she session and turn it into a she covery. Fact is, the Conservatives don't talk about that.
How do you respond when other parties point out that your policies regarding gun control and sentencing of those who commit violent crimes are just virtue signaling and do nothing to address the real issue?
Party of ambulance chasing politicians.
And how do you respond to people who claim that your photo ops have gotten in the way of very important things like filling sandbags to prevent their houses from being flooded?
Unfriendly and unneighborly today.
Being Prime Minister has given you the opportunity to meet many world leaders. How have you acted around them to ensure that Canada is well respected in the international community? Well, be sure to join us for the sixth and final part of this interview tomorrow. Welcome back to the sixth and final part of this interview. Now, I promised Justin Trudeau that there would be no questions regarding the blackface scandal, and I am a man of my word. Mr. Prime Minister, several years ago, you took a free trip to the Aga Khan's Island. Why did you not clear this trip with the Ethics Commissioner first?
The fact is, we work. Sorry, let me just try to reorder the thoughts. We worked with the lobby conflict of interest commissioner on a regular basis on a broad range of issues when the issues come up.
You claim to be a feminist, but yet some years ago you were accused of sexually assaulting a woman. Is this allegation true or false?
The same interactions could be experienced very differently from one person to the next.
You have had many scandals in your government, including you being the first Prime Minister found guilty of violating ethics laws. In light of this, what do you think is your biggest failing as a leader?
You all know that I don't necessarily have the best of track records on jokes.
And when you are doing interviews like this, Mr. Prime Minister, how do you generally respond to tough questions?
Come on. Really? Need to leave. That's the rule. Sorry. Go ahead.
Is there a different way that you could respond to tough questions?
I'm going to go grab my coat and I'll be right back.
Mr. Prime Minister, wait! I really wanted to ask you about the SNC-Lavalin scandal! Well, folks, I guess that wraps up the sixth and final part of my interview with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Make sure y'all get out and vote.